v'simchu, menichu v'simchu, menichu v'simchu. Oy oy oy, menichu v'simchu, menichu v'simchu. Shabbos soy yoim machmudim, oy vay oy vay oy vay oy oy, yoim yoim machmudim. Shoy v'lavezoy chnom, shana v'zoy chnom haymu meyidim. Oy ki
Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom. Today, the 4th of Sivan of the year 5777, 29th of May 2017. Here we stand on the second of the 3 days of Hagbala, of separation, of preparation for the giving of the Torah, which we commemorate tomorrow night, Tuesday night, the 30th of May, and Wednesday, 31st of May, and in diaspora, second day of Shavuot on Thursday, 1st of June. Here we stand poised for this very great experience, which is as much as we can make it in our hearts, in our embrace and acceptance of the Torah. And by our studies here each day, we are indeed striving to do this. Let me announce that today will be the last of our classes for this week. We shall be breaking from the end of today until next Sunday, June 4th, when, God willing, we shall be resuming our studies in the book of Job and in the Mishnah. And I hope and pray that also on this coming Sunday, June 4th, I'll be able to give a Shavuot Tov, more general discussion about the wider picture, the weekly portion, the days after Shavuot. For now, let us concentrate on our studies for today, coming now to our study of the book of Job, where we resume in chapter 34. Shalom. Today, the 4th day of the month of Sivan of the year 5777, corresponding to the 29th of May of the year 2017. And today we continue with our studies in Sefer Iyov, the book of Job, now moving into chapter 34, into the central discourses with which Elihu answers Job. And we have set ourselves the mission to understand what is it that Elihu is saying to Job that is giving him satisfaction, in as much as Job does not answer Elihu. What is this that gives Job satisfaction out of the words of Elihu in these discourses? And as we've already begun, we are following our great commentators, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, the Ramban of the 13th century, born towards the end of the 12th century and living until around the year 1270, a major figure in the transmission of the Kabbalah, and also the later commentator that lived about 250 years ago, the author of the commentary known to us as Metzudat David, with its sister commentary, which provides the definitions of the unfamiliar words in our text. And with the help of these commentators, I hope we shall find guidance. If I may try to sum up in one word what I consider to be the outstanding theme of all of these later chapters, both of the discourses of Elihu as they will develop, and also when God Almighty speaks to Job out of the whirlwind, I think it will be summed up in the Hebrew word hashgacha, providence. And this is what Elihu is telling Job, that it is not, as Job in his pain and writhing agony considered to be a system without meaning and a blind fate paying no attention to people's merits or demerits, but Elihu, as he will expound in the present discourse, says it is unthinkable that the righteous God could be acting in such a capricious way, completely unthinkable. And increasingly, as Elihu's discourses continue, we shall see that he points to the great detail of God's providence over every tiniest detail of creation, to the point that, as we shall see, even the raindrops, no two raindrops follow exactly the same path. If two raindrops were in the same path, the world could not endure. And here we have, indeed, an expression of the gevurot, the mighty deeds of God. Gevurot being that side of creation, which is epitomized in the figure of Yitzchak Avinu, Isaac the patriarch. And we have heard from the Talmud Yerushalmi in the passage from Sota discussing the identity of Elihu and the discussion between Rabbi Akiva on the one hand and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah on the other, that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah considers that Elihu is expressing the spirit of Yitzchak, and this I think is becomes a little clearer as we advance why it might be that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah made this prima facie very unusual statement about the identity of Elihu expressing the spirit of Isaac, because Isaac is the epitome of Gevurot, and as we shall see, among the culminating arguments in Elihu's discourse is precisely the Gevurot Geshamim, the might of God's gift of waters, of rains to the world, that he uses to point to God's providence. So with that, let us continue with the Hebrew text of chapter 34 of Yov, together with our classical commentators. And we see that there is indeed in the Hebrew text of the written book of Job a break between the end of chapter 3 and the chapter 33 and the beginning of chapter 34. This is reflected in the Koren printing, which has made a break between the two chapters. It is a parasha setuma, parasha petucha, an open parasha in the Hebrew text. Let's say there is in the Hebrew written text a slightly wider break than is actually reflected here in the Koran printing, but nevertheless it is reflected here, and there is a reason for this, which is explained by the commentator Metzudat David, who tells us that in the previous chapter, Eliphaz's main focus had been to emphasize to God that suffering and chastisement may come to a person as God's wake-up call, through a hint, through dream of the night, through some episode. And that is God's way of speaking, addressing man. And this was an answer to Job's plea. Well, why does he not answer me? Why does he not give me the explanation of why I go through all this? And here Elihu is suggesting that if you want the answer to that, you have to search inwards. You cannot expect that a voice will come out of the heaven. These are hints being sent to you to go deep, deep into your soul. And as we have seen, the main challenge facing the true tzaddik is to attain the ultimate level of complete humility. And perhaps we could say that it is that so far Job had not attained. So that was the content of Elihu's reproof in the previous chapter 33, where he said that it is not that God does not answer. The suffering and the tribulations are indeed God's message and God's way of communicating with man, calling him to wake up and repent. And now in the present chapter, he's going to answer a different aspect. He's going to explain to him that there is indeed a reward for righteousness and a punishment for evil that is given by God. And because this is going to go off on a new tack, because Job had argued that there seemed to be no rationality and no sense in his suffering, and now in this present discourse in chapter 34, Elihu was going to explain that it's unthinkable that the righteous God could possibly bring any kind of perversion of justice. So he makes a break between these two sections. At the end of chapter 33, he has perhaps waited to see if Job will answer him, which he does not. He's wanting to give Job a chance to consider his words, and now he begins his new his new discourse in chapter 34. Vaya'an Elihu vayomar. And Elihu spoke up and he said, Shema'u hachomim miloi v'yode'aim ha'azinu li. Shema'u, hear, hachomim, O sages, miloi, my words. Here Elihu is addressing both Job and the companions, all of whom are listed in our Talmud as prophets to the nations. And he calls upon them to hear his words. V'yodeim, those that know, those that are in the possession of the da'at Elokim, the knowledge of God, azinu li, attend to me. So here we have the two sides of the two columns, the right-hand column of Chokhmah, and in the word ha'azinu, we have the left-hand column of Bina, and out of the right-hand column of Chokhmah, wisdom, and the left-hand column of Bina comes Da'at, and those Yodi'im, those who would attain Da'at, have to both listen to the Chokhmah to receive it as it is, and Ha'azinu to attend to the Bina analytically and thoughtfully and contemplatively, and this way they will come to knowledge. And again, Elihu is appealing to Chokhmah, to prophecy, for the justification of what he's saying. In other words, what he's saying is not based upon human reason, but upon tradition received from the prophetic tradition that can come down from Adam through Shem and Noah, Shem and Ever, down to their times. Verse 3, Ki ozen milin tivhon v'chech yit'am le'echol. For the ear will examine the words, just like the chech, the palate, will taste in order to eat. So here this is a mashal attributing the aspect of taste to that which the ear discerns in the words of the speaker. The ear is to examine and to evaluate the words, just as the chech, the palate, will taste the food. And indeed, in Hebrew, throughout the Talmud, a person's reason in saying something is called their ta'am, the taste that they put into their words. So here, conceptually, the concept of the ear scrutinizing and evaluating and of the palate tasting are, in Hebrew thought, very much bound up, since the true food is the wisdom and is that which the chech, the palate, must taste and find the taste and the deep meaning in it. Mishpot nivcharo lonu, neda'o veinenu ma tov. Mishpot, a judgment, nivcharo lonu, is chosen for us. This could also mean let us choose the way of mishpat. Neda'o veinenu, let us know between us ma tov, what is the true good? Where does the good truth lie in this discussion? Let us examine all of this. The Hebrew word mishpat may have a number of connotations. It may mean when a person's case is brought before the court, be it the earthly court or the divine court, their actual cause, the cause that they are arguing, and that is one of the connotations of the word mishpat. A second would be the actual judicial procedure during which that cause is examined and judged upon. And the third meaning of the word mishpat would be the actual legal decision at the end of the case. And here Elihu is inviting Job in this manner of a search for truth with seriousness and with koved rosh, with taking one's time to examine all the reasons. Then we will establish between all of us what is the good for man, what is the good answer, the answer to this question. And now Elihu again quotes Job's own words and standpoint in the following verses. Verse 5, Ki omar Iyov tzodakti ve'el heisir mishpoti. For Job has said, tzodakti, I have been righteousness. I've been right all the time. I'm not guilty of any sin. And if so, ve'el, and God, heisir, has turned aside mishpoti, the justice of my case. And he continues, Elihu quoting Job in the first person, quoting the essence of Job's words, al mishpoti achaziv, onush chitzi veli posha. Al mishpoti, upon my judgment, the decree of suffering that has been issued against me. Achaziv, I am disappointed. Job is completely disappointed by this terrible penalty meted out to him for a reason that he knows not. And the Hebrew word achaziv has the root of kazav. Kazav is falsehood. And Rashi paraphrases these words on verse 6. He says, Achziv shofti shelo danani emet. I shall prove false my judge that has not judged me in a way of truth. Because onush chitzi, desperate, totally mortal, is chitzi, the arrow that has been sent into me, that has pierced me. Veli fosha, without sin. This is the argument that Elihu is now addressing, that Job sees no sense and no justice in the penalty that is being meted out to him. Well, now, just to pause briefly before we go on to take a look at the commentary here of Ramban on the opening words of chapter 34, where Elihu is answering Job. The way of the Ramban is to explain to us here the direction in which these discourses are going. It's helpful to follow Ramban here. He says that in the current address, Elihu will blame Job for having said that God has turned aside the justice of his cause, and that he is being punished with the most desperate suffering without any sin on his part. And Ramban stands to comment here. He says that this is a complete proof that, in the opinion of Elihu, Job's suffering did come to him on account of some sin and transgression. What that is, we have yet to establish, and as I maintain, it might be bound up with some element of ga'ava, of basic pride that still remains with Job until he is humbled by the discourses of Elihu, and finally by God speaking to him out of the whirlwind, completely humbled. But clearly, Elihu did not consider that Job's suffering came for no reason whatever, and perhaps, according to the Kabbalistic interpretation and explanation of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Ari, this would be that Job had to endure in this incarnation the suffering to atone for the transgressions of Terach in his own previous incarnation, the sufferings of Abram's father Terach, who violated the laws against intercourse while his wife was in her period, and so on, as we discussed at the very outset. So Elihu is convinced that it is not for nothing that Job's suffering has come upon him, says Ramban, and as he will say explicitly in this address to him in this chapter 34, that the eyes of God are on the ways of a man, and he will guard and observe all of the person's steps. There is no darkness and no shadow of death behind which the sinners can hide from him. And he's going to go on to say, Elihu will say, tells us Nachmanides, Ramban, that therefore God does recognize their deeds and he will overturn them during the night, and God does requite all acts of evil against people, even if they were done in darkness, and God will grind them down and punish them because, and this is the essential point here, I think, because Ashkacha Shlema, there is complete, perfect providence over all of them. This is the point to take out of Ramban's words here. And there is no darkness and no hiding from God, because God's eyes race all over the world, and every single detail of creation is under his providence. So that is the these are the ideas that will come now as Elihu continues to address Job in this discourse in chapter 34, now coming on to verse 7, which is a very strong attack on Job now. We have seen that the companions had indeed attacked Job. This poor Job is there in abject suffering, and everybody's coming along to tell him how wrong he is. And perhaps one can forgive Job in his suffering for having and not knowing what incarnation his soul might have come from, because in this life we do not know what was in our previous incarnation. So Job is there suffering all the time, but the suffering of Elihu is not one that Elihu causes him, does not provoke him to answer back in the way that he did to the other companions. So let's follow through in verse 7 as he begins his attack and disputation against Job. Mi gever ke'Iyov yishte la'ag kamoyim. Who is a man like Iyov? Mi gever ke'Iyov. Mi, who is gever, a mighty individual like Iyov? Yishte lag, he's drinking up, lapping up lag, scorn, scoffing, and abuse, kamoyim, as if it's thirst-quenching water. Elihu is saying here, Iyov, you are the senior among all of us in prestige and in prophecy. Like the word gever is not simply a male, but a person who has Gevurah, a person of might and influence. And how could be found such a person like Job? Yishte lag kamoyim, he's lapping up this scoffing like water. Says the paraphrasing the Mitzudat David, could there be found an important person like Job in his wisdom that will multiply so many words of scoffing, like somebody who's drinking water, who drinks as much as he wants to quench his thirst, since water is cheap? How can he possibly be doing this? Well, what is this la'ag that Job is drinking up? Says the Ramban, he's drinking like waters, words that are fit to scoff and scorn them. Because here is Job in his old age going off to join himself with sinners, with people of wickedness who deny God and the judgments of God. So this is going to be the focus of the reproof now of Elihu in this discourse, that it is unthinkable that God could have perverted Job's cause. Explaining further, Elihu now in verse 9, why Job is going off in the company of real wicked people. In verse 9, Ki omar lo yiskon gover biratzoiso im Elohim. For Job has said, as we have found in his previous discourses, lo yiskon gover, that a gever, a person, will not avail. Yiskon from the root of sochen, who is an agent that does something to help somebody out. Lo yiskon gover, a person has no benefit, biratzoso im Elohim, in the person's placating with God, bringing God to a state of conciliation with him through his good deeds. There's no point in our prayers, and there's no point in our good deeds. As Ramban here paraphrases, because according to the words of God, of Job, a person will have no benefit, and it will not avail him if he does the will of God, because after since Job's suffering is like an arrow that has hit him without sin, in that case, as was said earlier in chapter 21, Job, paraphrasing the words of the wicked, Ma shakai ki avdenu, what is the eternal God that we should serve him? Ma yo'il ki yifka bo, what will it help if we pray to him? So here, Job has actually presented a world in which there is no providence. He's removed providence, because Job has been arguing that everything has been coming to him by mere chance. So this is now what Elihu is going to be answering in the present discourse. Lochein anshe levov shim'u li cholilo lo'il meresha v'shadai me'ovel. Lochein, therefore, Anshe Levov, you distinguished men of heart, with a heart that has the capacity to understand, Shim'u li, listen to me, Cholilo, the Hebrew word Cholilo, far be it away from God. It would be Cholin, it would be completely profane, Lo'il, far away from God, Meresha, any kind of wickedness. V'shadai me'ovel, far away is the eternal God from any kind of ovel, any corruption of justice. Here we see an echo of the words of Abraham, our father, in his disputation, as it were, with God prior to the overthrow of the cities of Sodom and Amorah and the other cities of the plain. And when Abraham is interceding on behalf of any righteous that might be found in those cities, he said, far be it from God to do anything that is unjust. And here, on the basis of his prophecy, Elihu is elaborating the hashkafa, the worldview of the Torah on God's dealings with man, a matter of faith received to us through the prophets. Ki fo'al odom yishalem lo, uche'orach ish yamtzi'enu. Ki fo'al odom, for it is the action, the deed, the works of a person. Yishalem lo, he, God, shall pay to him. Uche'orach ish, according to the path, the way of the person. Yamtzi'enu, so too God will bring forth the pattern of providence that he puts over that person. It all depends upon the person and the soul, and of course we can view this as going across the generations through the different incarnations of the soul, that everything that a person does, whether in this incarnation or the previous, all is brought to him, requited in a way such as to bring him finally to the complete cleansing and perfection of his soul. Af omnom el lo yarshia, v'shadai lo ya'avis mishpot. But, indeed, af omnom, in truth, il lo yarshia, God will not condemn the innocent. V'shadai, the eternal lo ya'avis mishpot. God will not corrupt the judgment. He will not bring any corruption into the verdict, the decree that comes forth. Again and again we see in these verses these two primary names of God used in most of the book of Job. Keel, the left hand, the attribute of chesed, the emanation of all of the lower sfirot coming through this divine name, and Shaddai, the name associated with Yesod, which brings down the Shefa, the influence into our world. The two together are working together. It's unthinkable that there is any mishap or bad connection in the flow of the divine influences into the world. And here, the reasoning of verse 13, Mi fokad olov orzo, umi som tivel kulo. Mi fokad olov orzo, mi fokad, me instructed upon him, upon God, orzo, down to the earth. Who gave God instructions to create the earth one way or the other? It is He who is the free creator of everything. Misom tevel kulo. Who is it that put the tevel, another word for the earth, the globe, who put it all upon him? In other words, as explained to us by Rashi, what Elihu is saying here now is, who is there that rules over God to say to God, well, why did you do such and such? I never told you, I never instructed you to do such and such. Because who at all put commandments among God in his kingdom? And why, therefore, would he need to find pretexts against his creations? He has no need to answer to any ruler that stands above him to say that the reason why he did bad to this person was such and such. God answers to no one because nobody ever put the burden of the creation upon him. He chose it himself. And continuing the thought now, the reasoning in verse 14, Im yosim elov libo rucho v'nishmoso elov ye'esof. Im yosim elov libo, if he, God, shall put to any person libo, his heart, if he will pay attention to anyone, rucho v'nishmoso, the levels of ruach and of neshama of his soul, elov ye'esof, he would just gather them into him and swipe them off the face of the earth like a person swipes a fly off. He has no reason to prolong their suffering and come with pretexts and trick them and cause them agony. He can take them away in a moment. So if he's so why would he come with pretexts and start causing people needless suffering? Continuing with the thought of the omnipotence of God and the equality of all flesh before him. Verse 15, Yigavah kol bosor yohad ve'odom al ofor yoshuv. Yigavah kol bosor yochad. Yigavah, there shall expire. Kol basar, all flesh, yochad, all together. The whole creation God could bring to a finish in one moment if he so wished. So it makes no sense to say that he's capricious in bringing each and every person along their own personal path of providence. Odom al ofor yoshuv, he could, any particular person he wants, the person will come back onto the earth, like God says to Adam in the curse, ve'el ofor toshuv, you shall come back to the ofor, to the earth element, your life will come to an end. So if God were this capricious God who just came against people, he could just destroy everything in a moment. Ve'im binu Shim'o zois, ha'azino lekol miloi. Ve'im bino, Elihu challenges Job and the companions, Shim'o zois, please listen to zois, this. Ha'azino lekol miloi, listen to the voice of my words. Here in this verse we have a yichud. Ve'im bino, if you will wish to rise to the level of understanding, Shim'o zois, you must listen to zois. The Hebrew word zois, in its esoteric connotation, refers to the attribute of God's malchut, through which the kingdom is revealed in our world. Ha'azino lekol miloi, pay attention to the voice of my words. The kol, the voice, is the emanation from what is called Zeir Anpin, the small face of God, working through the aspect of Tiferet, the upper sphira that is shining influence down to Zot, the Malchut. So here Elihu is appealing to the listener to make a yichud, to understand that from top to bottom it is all one system. And now Elihu will scorn the idea that God could be thought to be unjust. Ha'af sonei mishpot yahavosh, ve'im tzadik kabir tarshiyah. Ha'af, indeed, could it be sonei mishpot, the one that hates justice, yahavosh, shall rule. Ve'im tzadik kabir, if one that is righteous, kabir has the connotation of very much so, one who is righteous to the utmost. Tarshia, you, Job, will you rule him guilty? As Rashi here paraphrases on this verse, could it be that the judgment is the justice of one that hates justice? In other words, could the verdict of the righteous judge turn out to be the verdict of one that hates justice? It is unthinkable. Unthinkable. The Hebrew word yachavosh in this context is translated as having the connotation of rulership. And we have this in some other verses in Isaiah chapter 3, verse 7, where a person is saying he does not want to rule and have influence. So here, the one that has rule and influence is the Almighty, and it makes no sense, says Elihu, that the extremely righteous one that is the creator of the universe could possibly one that hates justice. And continuing with the same a reproof to Job, Ha'amor lemelech beli yo'al, rosho il nidivim. Ha'amor, interrogative, could it be said, could one say, lemelech, to a king, beli ya'al, worthless, without any advantage or benefit whatever, a very negative word here. Rosho il nidivim, could one use the expression rosho, wicked, to the nidivim, to the nobles? That is to say that it is unthinkable to say to this king of the universe, is it in any event, even to a king of flesh and blood, is it right to call the king insultingly worthless? Is it right to use the term rasha, wicked, evil, to nedivim, to those that are noble? And this is a kal v'chomer. If to a king of flesh and blood, one would not use such language to guard the ruler of the whole universe, one cannot speak of God in this way. And now Elihu says that God has absolutely no need to show partiality to anybody, and therefore God's judgment is always going to be completely righteous. Continuing in verse 19, Asher lo noso pnei sorim velo nikar shoa lifnei dol ki ma'asei yodov kulam. Very beautiful words of Elihu's prophecy here. Asher lo noso, God has not lifted up Pnei Sorim, the face of ministers and princes. He is no respecter of even the foremost of his angels or the foremost of the rulers of the earth. He never is a respecter of persons. Velo nikar sho'ah, the man that is sho'ah, the Hebrew word here has the connotation of smooth, successful, prestigious. He is not recognized. Lo nikar sho'ah, the prestigious individual is not given recognition. Lifnei dol, before the poor, weak individual. Ki ma'asei yodov kulam, for the work of his hands are they all. God's justice, as we've seen through our history, the destruction of Sodom and Amorah, destruction of Egypt, verse 20, Rega yomusu v'chatzoth lo yilo yogoashu am ve'avoru ve'yosiru abir lo ve'yod. All of humanity, Rega yomusu, in a moment they could die. V'chatzot loilo, in the middle of the night, yogoashu, they can be thrown into turbulence like a volcano that is spewing out the waters. They will completely be overthrown. Yogoashu all of the members of the people shall be thrown into turbulence, into wandering, moved from their place. Vaya'avoru, and they shall pass away from where they were. Vayosiru abir, they themselves, Yosiru, this people in their downfall, they shall be turning aside from themselves all of their power. Like we see today, the major power of the world is unilaterally people just pulling apart her influence and prestige in the world. Lo v'yod, not by hand, with no power in their own hand to prevent this. And why these divine judgments across all of the world, the downfall of nations and each and every individual being judged by him. Verse 22, verse 21, another foundation of our hashkafa, our Torah view of the world. Ki einov al darchei ish b'chol tze'odov yir'eh. Ki eino, for God's eyes, his unseen eyes, al darchei ish, they're upon the roads of a person, the paths of a person, v'chol tze'odov, and all of the person's steps, yir'eh, he sees it all. The Hebrew word hashkacha, which we translate as providence, is actually from a root that means watching. He's watching us. Ein choshech ve'ein tzal moves lehisoser shom po'ale oven. Ein choshech, there is no darkness. Ve'ein tzal moves, there is no shadow of death. Lehisoser shom, to hide away there. Po'ale oven, the workers of iniquity. Thought we find elsewhere in Psalms and in the prophets, there's nowhere that anybody can hide away from God. Verse 23, a very important verse in Elihu's reproof to Job. Ki lo al ish yosim od lahaloch el il bamishpot. Ki lo al ish, not upon any person, yosim od, shall he, God, put any more than what is due to them. Lahaloch el il, such as to cause the person lahaloch to go back to God, bamishpat, in an appeal that he's been treated unjustly. This is a statement of faith by Elihu, that he is asking Job to accept that the just God does not ever put upon anyone any more than is due to them. And now continuing Elihu's depiction of the providence through which God brings down the mighty, verse 24, Yoroah kabirim lo chikir, vayamid achirim tachtom. Yoroah kabirim, God will do evil to and break down the kabirim, the mighty. We see this root appearing in this chapter again and again, the kabir. God is kabir, mighty, and there are people that are kabirim, the mighty, but God throws them down, lo chikir, without any fathoming of their numbers and their reasons. Vayamid achirim tachtom, God has the power to stand up others in their place. Lochein yakir ma'abodehem, v'hofach lailo vayidako. Lochein, for the reason that, why does he overturn them? Lochein, for this verity, because yakir ma'abodehem, he recognizes their works. V'hofach lailo, he overturns the night. Vayidako, and they are crushed. Tachas reshoim sefokom b'makom ro'im. Tachas, under reshoim, under the wicked, that is to say, the place of the wicked. We over again in the Tanakh find the word tachas, meaning, since it means what is under you, it refers to the place where you are. It is the tachas reshoim, the place of the wicked. Sefakam, the root sefakam is like in Bilam clapping his hands. Balak claps his hands in Bilam's face in abuse, and likewise God strikes the place of the wicked. B'makom ro'im, in a place of people watching, in broad daylight where everybody can see. Asher al kein soru me'acharov v'chol dorochov lo hiskilu. Asher al kein soru me'acharov, because on account of Soru me'acharov, they turned aside from going after him. V'chol dorochov lo hiskilu, all of his ways they did not contemplate and gain understanding of. Here we have a reflection of Job's words in chapter 21 when he was complaining about the apparent arbitrariness of the wicked, and he put in the mouths of the rebellious generations of the flood and of the division of the nations with the Tower of Babel, that they said to God, turn aside from us, the exact same roots here, turn aside from us, knowledge of his ways we do not want. So here Elihu is saying that it is not this, it is not an arbitrary judgment, and those who preach that there is no providence, God overturns them. Lohovi olov tzakas dol Lohovi olov tzakas dol v'tzakas aniyim ishmo, to bring upon them the cry of the dal, of the poor, and the cry of the aniyim, another word denoting the the poor, dal is the lowly, aniyim would be the poor and those subjected to suffering. Yishma, God will hear them. In other words, those rulers that had abused their peoples and exploited the poor, God hears all of those cries. Lehavi olav, God is bringing upon him, upon the wicked, the cry that the wicked person caused to arise to heaven. V'hu yashkit, u'mi yarshi'a, v'yaster ponim, u'mi yishurenu, v'al goy, v'al odom yochad. Continuing with the mysteries of the providence of the Almighty, the inscrutable providence. V'hu yashkit, if he, God, yashkit, will cause silence to a people, namely tranquility. Umi yarshia, who will accuse him of having done wrong. V'yastir ponim, umi yishurenu, if God chooses to hide away his face, umi yishurenu, who will see him, who will find him? V'al goy, both upon a whole nation he exerts his providence. V'al odom, on each and every individual simultaneously, the generality and each particular yochad all together. Magnificent testimony to the absolute unity of God and the unity of his providence all over, and all to bring down the wicked through the cycle of refinement of the creation. Verse 30, Mimeloch odom chonef, mimokeshei om, all to stop from ruling odom chonef, a lying, hypocritical person, mi moikshei adam, from those who ensnare the people. So Elihu has depicted the hand of judgment of God, about which we have indeed heard from the previous discourses of the three companions, Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, who had addressed Job in terms that are somewhat reminiscent in places of Elihu's address. But now he turns to Job as a person and as an individual, and he's now preaching to Job the way that a meek individual must accept what God sends to them, even without understanding why. Verse 21, Ki el he'omar nososi lo echbol. Ki el, for when it is to God that the suffering person is speaking, he'omar, surely must he not say, nososi, I've borne it, I'm willing to bear it. Lo echbol, I shall not rebel, I shall not go against God and spoil things by complaining. In other words, now Elihu is saying that you cannot see suffering as irrational, capricious, and unjust. One rather has to turn to God with meekness and humility and say, well, I shall bear it without going wrong. And this is the approach one must take to God in one's prayers and supplications out of one's travail. Verse 32, Bil'adei echezeh ato horeini, im ovel po'alti lo osif. Bil'adei echezeh, besides that which echezeh I can see. Ato horeini, you teach me and show me. The words of a prayer that Elihu is giving to us to ask to be shown what are our hidden sins that we must atone for, which is also found in the closing verse of Psalm 19 of King David, and also in his Psalm of Repentance, Psalm 51, when the prophet Nathan came to him after he sinned with Bathsheba. So we must ask God to show us what it is. Im ovel po'alti, if I have accomplished some corruption and sin, lo osif, I shall not add to it. This is the proper approach of the penitent. I shall not do any more. So now, reinforcing his words to Job, Elihu now again attacks Job for expecting that he should be exempt from the way that God deals with the world. Verse 33, Me'imcho yishalmeno kimo asto ki ato sivchar velo oni umayo dato dabir. This verse 33, as explained to us by Rashi. So says Elihu to Job, did the Holy One, blessed be He, have to consult with you in deciding how to repay you, such that you would have the right to say, well, I'm sick of all this, I'm not going to live forever, like Job had said in chapter 7, verse 16. And why doesn't he come to my rescue? Do you think that God is going to exact from you what he exacts according to your understanding of things and your desire, and that you should choose the method of requital and not me? That is to say, Rashi takes Elihu to be speaking in the place of God. Hame'imcho yishalmeno. Is it from with you, yishalmeno, that God should pay the penalty? Kimo asto, for you have despised and expressed yourself sick of his dealings with you. Ki ato sivchar velo oni, that you should choose the dealings of God with you and not I, Elihu, speaking in the words of God. Umayo dato dabir. Whatever you know, then go ahead and say it out. The Metzudat David takes this verse a little differently. I think the interpretation of Rashi is very powerful. Metzudat David takes it as Job saying, are you the only person in the world that has suffered, and that the whole inquiry into the ways of God's justice begins and ends with you, that you yourself see that you have to decide whether the judgment is righteous or not? But Rashi's interpretation of Elihu speaking in the name of God, that you're going to choose God's dealings with you. If you know anything about this, go ahead and speak. And the fact is that Job does not answer. Continuing then, Anshi livov yomeruli, v'gever chochom shomea li. Anshi livov yomruli, let the men of heart to whom Elihu has been appealing to listen to him, let them tell me, the gever chochom shomea li, and the great individual that is wise listening to me. Iyov lo v'das yidabir, u'devorov lo v'haskil. Job, lo v'das, not with the necessary das, the necessary wisdom and understanding has he been speaking. Here, Elihu, according to our commentators, actually justifying Job. He's saying, look, the poor man here is in excruciating pain, having lost his entire family, his sons and daughters, all of his wealth, and now his body is writhing in agony. And it's that can justify Job, that he does not speak with das. He's not speaking with the compos mentis. He's troubled, racked with suffering, but his words are not to be taken as words of truth. To be taken as the words of a man driven to distraction. Devar of love haskel. He's not speaking with the level of sechel that needs to be applied in this question. Ovi yibochein Iyov ad netzach al teshuvois be'anshi oven. Ovi here is not my father. The word Ovi is related to the word Evyon, one that is needy and full of desire. Ovi, my desire would be Yibochen Iyov ad netzach, that Job should be tested until eternity. A very chilling statement here by Elihu against Job, that if he's not going to wise up and get to understand that you cannot come against God with any accusation of injustice, according to the Metzudat David, the Elihu would rather that Job continues to be racked in suffering forever, al teshuvois ba'anshei oven, over the teshuvois, over the answers ba'anshei oven, to men of iniquity. That is to say that we need an answer here. If Job has entered to this degree of kefirah, of heresy, that he denies that there is any providence over the world, then we need him to suffer forever, to be racked in pain, to give an answer to the people of iniquity who will draw courage from Job, saying there is no providence and therefore they can do as they wish. Better that Job should suffer forever, and that way give an answer to these people, because if Job's suffering just disappears as capriciously as it came, then they will say, well, it's all capricious, no destiny, no providence, and do as you like. Ki Yosef al chatosoi fesha, for Job is adding over any sins that may be in him further iniquity. Veinenu yispok, he is adding to fullness and satisfaction more and more sin and iniquity. And what he's saying, among us, V'yerev amorov lo'el, in his disputing and sending his words as challenges to God, the just and almighty, God, creator of the world. So with that, my friends, we conclude our study of Tanakh for today, a very powerful and inspiring chapter of the words of Elihu. And with the help of God, in just a few minutes, we shall come on to our studies of the Holy Mishnah for today.
Oy vay, oy vay, oy vay, oy vay, oy vay, oy vay, Shabbos. Ben mi yitzvah v'vas Shabbos. Oy vay, oy, 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 oy. Na, 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 oy, 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 oy. Kaye Litzah. Oh nalizot oy nishmas kol chay nishmas 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 kol chay nishmas kol chay vegam nalizot yoy vay vegam nalizot echoy vesimchu echoy vesimchu ki kevarusavo oy ben mishneleichem oy doy doy vekidish rabu oy deroy matamim ay ay veriach nedivo Bevias goyay, bevias goyay, lechayay, oy lamabu.
Shalom, my dear friends, back again with our studies, complete the studies we have for today, turning now to our holy Mishnah in Tractate Shabbat. And without further ado, let us go into our studies. And I hope that if we do study our Mishnahs at a brisk pace today, we will be able to reach the end of chapter 17 and then be able to start with a new chapter 18, when we resume our studies, which God willing will take place on Sunday the 10th of June. That is this coming Sunday the 4th of June, this coming Sunday, the first Sunday after Shavuot. Shalom, today, the 4th day of the month of Sivan of the year 5777, corresponding to the 29th of May of the year 2017. And we continue now our studies in Tractate Shabbat, the Mishnah of Shabbat, now in chapter 17, beginning with Mishnah 6, which deals with another aspect of the laws we have been dealing with about muktzeh, things that may be not handled on the Shabbat. We're here in our Mishnah, we're talking about the days when people drew their water from a well, and in days when people were conservative in their use of materials, they might adapt a pumpkin shell, the pumpkin skin, when the flesh was scooped out, to serve as a bucket to lower into the well to draw water. And the problem with a dried out pumpkin shell that could be very good to hold the water is that it might not sink down into the water, and therefore people might put a stone to weigh it down so that the pumpkin shell will go down into the water. The squash skin, and they'll be able to lift it up again to draw their water. And this is what our Mishnah is talking about. Ho'even sheba keiruyo. This stone that people put into the keiruyo, which is a dried out squash pumpkin shell, im memalin bo ve'eno noifeles. If when you fill up to draw the water with the pumpkin skin, ve'eno noifeles, and the stone does not fall out because it is secured in the pumpkin shell, memalin bo, we may fill up with water to draw the water. Milui is the Hebrew word that we translate as drawing. It actually means to fill. You could fill up the keruya bucket with this stone in it. Ve'im lav ein memalin bo. If not, if the stone is not going to be secured in the keruya shell of the pumpkin, you may not use that stone on the Shabbat to draw water with. And the reason is that the keiruyo, the pumpkin skin, has been adapted for use in the well to draw the water. The stone, we have seen that a stone simply lying on the ground somewhere, if it has not been designated for some use prior to the Shabbat, that stone is in the category of muktzeh, one of the kinds of items that may not be moved around on the Shabbat. So here, if the stone is secure in the keiruyo, the stone is a part of the keiruyo pumpkin skin and may be used on the Shabbat. However, if the stone was not secure, then this creates a problem because the stone is not a part of the keiruyo temporary bucket, and therefore the stone remains muktzeh, and creates another problem that we shall be dealing with later in our tractive with items that are muktzeh. That if a muktzeh, unmovable item, is on some item that is otherwise movable, you cannot move that other item because it's become a base for the muktzeh. If the muktzeh item was standing on this base from before the Shabbat, and it's not a part of the base, but it's just a regular stone standing there, you cannot even move the keiruyo, the temporary bucket, because it is a base for the muktzeh. And going on to an allied issue, which is talking about whether an item that would normally be muktzeh because it's not been designated for any item, whether if it is used for some permissible purpose on Shabbat, it comes out of the category of muktzeh. The zemora, a zemora would be a branch of a vine, which under normal circumstances, if it's lying around outside, it's not anything. It's just a long stick that you have no use for. But zemero shehi keshura betofiach. But if this vine branch was tied securely to a tofiach, the tofiach being some other item that could be used for drawing water, some small bowl, but you couldn't lower it down into the well without the vine branch being attached to it. If so, this vine branch is now on the Shabbat serving a permissible purpose, assuming that the well is in fact within the person's reshut hayachid. We already learned in the end of chapter 16 that one could not draw from a well water or have a non-Jew draw water from a well if the well is a private domain but the surrounding area is a public domain. Here the assumption permitting the person to draw this water on the Shabbat is that the well is within his private domain, and the water that he draws up he will be able to transfer from the well into his yard. And here the question is with this with this zemora, this vine branch, is if it's fastened securely, it becomes part of the temporary bucket, may be used on the Shabbat, is not considered to be muktzeh. Well, now we come to another dimension of these laws, and in the 7th Mishnah, we deal with questions relating to the way that people would, in those days, shut up their windows. Today, many people have drapes or Venetian blinds, but in those days, they might have nothing better than some shutter that is made to stop up the window. And the question in our Mishnah is whether a window of this nature, under what circumstances, if it was not stopping up the window, under what circumstances could it be used to stop up the window on the Shabbat? The issue here is that if a window was securely, if a shutter was secure in place in the aperture, or if it was attached to the aperture in some way, as it were, if it were on hinges, then it's part of the overall structure of the house, the binyan. But when the shutter is not attached to the structure, the question that arises is, are we performing a kind of building on Shabbat when we take the window that was detached and put it in the aperture? Because according to one opinion we shall encounter in our Mishnah, this is forbidden on the Shabbat to add even to an existing structure. That is not the halachas we shall see. Let us follow through the words of Mishnah 7 now. Bekak hachalon, the stopper, the shutter of a window. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, bizman shehu koshur v'salui. At a time, bizman shehu kosher, at a time when it is kashur, it's tied to, v'salui, it's hanging there by the window, poikekin boy, then you may touch the window, you may use that shutter as a stopper to stop up the aperture. The imlav, if not, if it was not attached, not hanging there by the window from the wall, ready for use, ein poikekin boy, you cannot pick it up and put the shutter in the aperture to stop it up. However, the other opinion of the other sages, ben koch uven koch, whether it is tied and hanging there or it's not, poikekin boy, one may stop up the aperture with it. The foundation of this machloket, this discussion between Rabbi Eliezer and the sages, is that in the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, it is not even permitted on the Shabbat to add to an existing structure. According to the opinion of the sages, if there was some existing structure under circumstances that are defined further by the halacha, it is permitted to add to it. So the opinion of the sages, it makes no difference if the shutter was attached to the window or hanging there, or whether you had to drag it across the ground. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you may not stop up the window on the Shabbat. According to the other rabbis, who do not prevent you from adding to some existing structure, it is permitted. And now, having already touched the distinction between a structure that is attached to the ground, where there are issues of binyah, of building, as opposed to kelim, utensils, which are not considered to be subject to the prohibition of building on Shabbat, we come now to speak about the coverings of kelim, the coverings of utensils, and we come back to the point in a way where we started this chapter when we started talking about when we started dealing with the laws of muktzah. We were asking whether a cover of some vessel that had become detached on the Shabbat, like the cover of a chest, may be moved on the Shabbat, and we saw that it could be. So now the Mishnah returns to an allied subject, kol kisui akelim, all of the covers of kelim. Sheyesh lohem beis achizo, if the covers of these vessels have a handle, a beis achizo, literally a house to hold it by, a place to hold it by, nitolim b'Shabbos, they may be taken, moved on the Shabbat. Omar Rabbi Yosef, steps forth Rabbi Yossi to qualify, in his opinion, how we apply the above statement. Bameh devarim amurim. In what circumstances are the above words said? Bechisui karka. If we are talking about covers of the ground, that is to say, if there was a pit in the ground and it had a cover, like sometimes you have manholes in the street where there is a metal cover. So under what circumstances could they be taken up? Bechisui karka, you'd have to have a handle there if we were talking about moving this cover on the Shabbat. Aval bekisui hakelim, when it comes to the covers of regular utensils like pots and bowls, ben kach uven kach nitolim b'Shabbos. Whether they do have a handle or whether they do not have a handle, they may be taken up on the Shabbat. Let us distinguish between something that's attached to the ground and something that is not. There is throughout our Mishnah the distinction between a bore, which is a pit in the ground, an excavation in the ground, and a dus, which is some kind of tank that is built up on the ground to act as a container, say, for water. A bore would be an excavation under the ground. A dus would be a tank built up above partially above the ground, and either one of them may have a cover, and the covers might have a handle or might not. Within the house there are kelim, regular utensils like pots and pans and bowls that may have a cover, and everybody agrees that whether they have a handle or not, they may be taken up on the Shabbat. According to the way that our Talmud interprets our Mishnah, it is that everybody agrees that regular vessels, the cover may be moved on the Shabbat with or without a handle. Everybody agrees that if there is a cavity in the ground or a tank that has a cover without a handle, then that cover may not be moved on the Shabbat because it is attached to the ground and is basically serving something that is in the ground. It is considered to be part of a building, a structure, and may not be moved. According to the Talmud, there are some kelim, for example, the kinds of ovens that were used in Mishnaic times, were they actually built on the ground, and they were a structure where the fire would be under the surrounding earthenware or brick-built oven under which the fire was burning and heating pots that we placed on top of this oven, and there might be covers over the apertures in the oven at the top where, as long as there's no pot need to be put on it, there will be a cover on it, and sometimes one might need to put a pot on the oven to remove the cover, and the question will be, can you move the cover of what is called a keli when it's attached to the ground? And the question is revolves around, does this cover have a handle or not? And according to our Talmud, according to Rabbi Yossi, even though the utensil is built on the ground, it's not considered to be part of the ground, and therefore, if it has a handle, you may move the cover. According to the other sages against Rabbi Yossi, the vessel that is attached to the ground is considered to be part of the ground, and if there's no handle to the cover, it may not be moved. With that, we conclude chapter 17, and we'll be continuing with other aspects of the laws of muktzeh in the ensuing chapters. So with that, my dear friends, we come to the end of our studies for today, and come to the end of our studies for this week. And I would like to wish you Chag Sameach for the very awesome festival of Shavuot, the festival of the weeks that we've been counting the days to day by day, for nearly now 7 weeks since the second day of Pesach, and we're finally here at this great mountain, the mountain of humility that we must ascend in order to receive God's Torah. So here from the holy city of Jerusalem, where is the holy temple, the site of the temple, which will be the focus of the Shavuot festivals, let me wish you Chag Sameach and look forward to resuming our studies next Sunday, the 4th of June, with the help of God at our usual time. Shalom from Jerusalem. Chag Sameach, my blessings to you and all your dear ones for a truly joyous festival of receiving of the Torah in our time anew. Shalom from Jerusalem.